Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Nexus seminar series. We'll be starting in about 1 or 2 minutes time. We are slowly now letting our guests enter into our meeting. So be patient with us and we will start in about a minute time. Thank you. As I said, welcome everyone to our Nexus seminar. We will be starting in about, I think, 30 seconds around. Our colleagues are slowly joining the meeting. Thank you for your patience. Number of people is continuing increasing, so let me get a few more seconds and then we will start. So please let me officially start with our Nexus seminar. My name is Serena Cauce, and I'm here together with Professor Samanthi Silva. We are coordinating the Nexus seminar, and today it's my pleasure to have on board Dr. Valentin Aich. And Dr. Valentin Aich joined the Global Water Partnership as a senior water and climate specialist in 2020. And he has seconded to the World Meteorological Organization, WMO, where he was working for the technical support unit for the joint flood and droughts program, both of organization as well as coordinating the joint activities. Valentin has profound knowledge, and he was previously Associate Scientific Officer at the Global Climate Observing System of WMO. And before joining WMO, he has worked on climate change and adaptation together with UNEP in Afghanistan. He is a guest scientist also at the Peak Institute, where he has conducted research for the past 9 years with a focus on hydroclimatic extremes, and where he has also written his PhD thesis on floods in the Niger River Basin. So with this introduction, I think we have increased expectation here among our public, and I'm delighted to give you the floor, Valentin, and I'm looking forward to your interesting speech. Over to you.
Thank you, Serena, for your very kind introduction. So I'll start sharing the screen. Please let me know if that works.
Yes, we can see your screen now.
Can you see it?
Not on full screen, though.
Not full screen yet. Okay, just a second. I need to change the monitor. Sorry. So I hope now you can see it in full screen.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Okay, then, yeah, thanks again for the invitation. I am presenting today on behalf of the Associated Program on Flood Management, APFM, and the Integrated Drought Management Program, the IDMP. The terrible acronym, so it's the Flood Program and the Drought Program, and they are maintained, or we have these programs jointly with the World Meteorological Organization and the Global Water Partnership. Before I start, perhaps just a word to all that don't know these two organizations. So the World Meteorological Organization is the what we say ourselves, the authoritative voice on water, climate, and weather of the United Nations. It's one of the smallest UN organizations based in Geneva here in Switzerland. And yeah, kind of the core task of WMO is to coordinate the national hydrological and meteorological services around the world. Yeah, almost all the countries of the world are members. And it actually even predates the UN. So we are celebrating 150 years of WMO, or the predecessor organization, here in 23 now. And Global Water Partnership, we are, we always say, a network of networks. And we put water at the heart of development. So it means we have globally we have 13 regional partnerships, and in all these partnerships we have country water partnerships, so really with boot on the ground from academia, scientific institutions, government organizations, private sector, and so on, and all working on water with different perspectives. And yeah, for APFM and IDMP, for these two programs, these two organizations are working now together since a couple of years, and I'll come to that a little bit later. So, but I would like to start with an image, I guess, that you have seen plenty of times, and this is a courtesy from Professor Reggiani. This is the R flood in July from 2021. I don't want to go here into detail. It's just to really show that this was an extraordinary event. And there was a pre-warning given to this event like a couple of days before in different steps. Technically and scientifically, there was really good knowledge about what would come, at least what could come. There was also a risk, of course, associated to it, or a probability level. Yeah, there have been events that have been at least as strong. I think the 1910 event was even higher when you look into the marks on the houses. Anyway, despite the warning and the good level, there was huge devastation. Of course, you cannot move a house immediately, or you cannot save everything, even if you know 2 weeks in advance that such a flood would happen. But what you could have done, of course, is save lives. So you all know there were a lot of deaths related to that event, not just in Germany, but in other parts of I think, Belgium and Netherlands as well. And I think there are still investigations going on what went wrong, why this communication chain did not fail, despite actually the knowledge that we had. And yeah, some of the reasons are listed here. So some institutions underestimated the flood, even though it was announced by forecasting systems. Also, authorities on different level, from the county level, from the sub-county level as well, did not really actually know how to respond. The collaboration with the media did not go very well. Also, the historical memory of the people was not very good. So also people on the ground did not actually know how to respond and didn't take some warnings seriously. And so there was a there were several reasons and complex situation why this turned out into such a catastrophe. And in general, we see that not only there in Germany, but this is really something that we see in many places, even more perhaps in developing countries, where, of course, people are more used to that and are even expecting that these kind of systems are not really working out 100%. But this was quite an eye-opener, I think, for many policymakers, not just in Germany, but around the world as well, where we realized, okay, even a very sophisticated technical solution like the one that was installed in Germany is not 100% fit for purpose if it's not integrated into a global policy into a policy framework that includes not just the dissemination or the actual forecasting and warning, but this includes also the response capabilities of the people, and a dissemination that works also for people that are not having the right app or things like that. So I just wanted to start with that, to set somehow the scene that this is not just a problem for developing countries, but this is really a global issue. And when we look into climate change, we are quite sure that situations like that will occur more often. So this is from on the left side, this top 10 list is from the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report. They do this annually, and since the last couple of years, I think more than 5 years, what you see here in the top 3 is somewhere in the top 5 usually. So and in the last year, it's always number 1: climate action failure, extreme weather events, and perhaps even like related issues. So it is taken seriously nowadays. However, we are still struggling to really adapt and increase also the resilience against this these kind of hazards, climate-related hazards. And we know also, according to the latest IPCC reports, that even when we are on track with the Paris Agreement, and if we will reach the 1.5 degrees, that we will get bad results. So we knew about this since a long time. As you can see here, this is a forecast that has been done, I think, in 1986 or so. And even then, if you look now from our perspective now that we actually know how climate change went, we already knew quite well over 20 years ago, over 30 years ago, that such a situation might occur. So this is nothing that should actually surprise us, but of course it still surprises us. And this increase in climatic extremes that we are currently facing is, and I will come to that in a minute, probably not the new normal as often is communicated, but it's just the beginning of the new normal. So in many places, the situation will, I think, still aggravate, even if we can reach the Paris Agreement goal of 1.5 degrees. And this slide is just summarizing very shortly some of the explanations why these extremes are actually increasing with climate change. And one very simple explanation is with the Clausius-Clapeyron relationship. Some of you might be aware of it, that with every centidegree of warming of a certain air mass, the atmospheric water content is increasing by 7%. So that means that there is way more water in warmer air. So when we increase the temperature of the atmosphere, and we already do that almost by 1.5%, there is more water in the air, so it can rain more, and it can have rain more intense. And of course, this water is missing somewhere else. So also from the soils and groundwater and so on, we see that there is less water available for our domestic use, but also for plants and so on. And also other things are, of course, connected. We have a higher evapotranspiration, which is, I think, quite obvious. There are reduced snowpacks. There is an earlier snow melt. There is glacier melting. And there are also scientifically very interesting changes of weather patterns. So if you look into this nice moving wave there on the right side, that's in red, that's the jet stream waves, the so-called Rossby waves, and I think there are usually between 5 to 9 of these waves on the northern hemisphere, and they are kind of moving eastwards, and this brings the changes of these big weather patterns that we face here in the northern hemisphere. And this Rossby waves, they are actually driven by the temperature difference. I mean, to simplify it, by the temperature difference of the Arctic and the mid-latitudes. And since the Arctic is now warming way faster than the mid-latitudes in climate change, we often see that this motor is actually stuttering, and we have kind of what we call quasi-stationary waves. So these waves stay for a long time at the same position, which can lead then, if it's a high over Europe, for example, can lead to weeks of steady, warm and dry conditions. Or on the opposite side, if we have, for example, a low over the Adriatic Sea, it can, and it stays there for a long time, it can shuffle precipitation or humidity over the Alps into southern Germany, for example, and lead to inundations there. And this explains, for example, also why there are more blizzards and snowstorms in the eastern US, because one of these waves often stays then still over the eastern US. And that led at the beginning of climate change to this interesting fact that actually climate warming or climate change meant a decrease in average temperature on the east side. I mean, now this has already been overruled by the increasing temperature, but it's an interesting phenomenon, and just one of these phenomena that or change of weather patterns that explain why we have an increase in extremes and climate change. Yeah, so that just to explain why this is connected to climate change. And when we look into the last assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so this is the report that informs the Climate Convention of the United Nations, UNFCCC, that has every year this famous conference of parties, the COP. And you can see here the map that shows how much in the past the heavy precipitation has increased. So with these hexagons, that's the map of the world. So you can see the Americas and Europe and Africa and Asia. And all these green areas are where we have significantly enough data now to understand that there is an increase in heavy precipitation, leading also to an increase in flooding. The gray areas, we just don't have enough data yet, but you can quite see clearly here that there is no area where we actually see currently a decrease. And if we look into droughts, this is the same map for droughts. You can see also for agricultural and ecological droughts, you can see for many areas around the world that there is a confirmed trend in increasing drought conditions. And for most areas, we still don't have enough data to provide this information with a reasonable uncertainty. However, if we look into the modeling and into the future, and this, I think I alluded to that at the beginning, you can already see that here on the left side for heavy precipitation and in the middle for drought, that even under a best case scenario, so a 1 degree warming, if we can really achieve the Paris Agreement, both flooding and droughts will increase in the areas where they currently already occur. So for drought, it's worse, it's doubling, it's 2 times, even under best case conditions, and for floods or for heavy precipitation, it's 1.5 times more often. And also the intensity will increase. So for droughts with a half of a standard deviation, which is quite substantial, and for droughts 10%, which can mean, of course, a lot if you think about river discharge, for example. And we don't want to speak about the 2 or 4 degrees, because then we even see way more worse problems for the world facing droughts and floods. So the general message from these 2 slides is that we need to prepare. These events will occur more often and more intense, even under best case conditions. So we really need to get more resilient. And how do we do that? Of course, there are solutions since longer time, and the development from the last 20 years is really that we need to stop going into from the crisis management, that we are each time so surprised again by a flood or a drought, but we really need to manage the risk on the long term. And this is cheaper, it saves lives, and it also has several other co-benefits to societies. So we don't want to treat just the symptoms, but we really want to treat the vulnerability and the related risk of the population. And this is why our 2 programs have been established. So I mentioned APFM before. The Associated Program on Flood Management was established in 2001. So we have over 20 years now of working in this sphere. And the new thing that came along with the integrated water resources management was the integrated flood management. Really is not just about flood control or protecting or create infrastructure. Of course, this is important as well, but it's really about managing a flood and increasing the benefits of floodplains and minimizing the loss of life. And therefore, you have 3 things that you can use. So it's the land use management, is the water resources management, and the risk management. Yeah, with APFM, we're doing this with many partners since over 20 years. In regard of droughts, 10 years later, roughly 10 years later, the IDMP was established. At this high-level meeting on national drought policy, you can see the poster on the right side. And a lot of organizations, like including WMO, but also the Convention to Combat Desertification, one other convention of the United Nations, and the Food and Agriculture Organization, they established IDMP then together. And with our drought program, it's, as I mentioned, jointly between WMO and GWP. We promote these 3 pillars of drought management. So monitoring and early warning. The second pillar is risk and impact assessment. And the third pillar is risk mitigation, preparedness, but also response, because there will always be a residual risk. And this has been applied in many places around the world successfully. And of course, it's nothing that once accomplished, then you're done, but it's really a sustained system that needs improvement all the time, that needs to be adapted to the changing risk landscape. But yeah, we see that it works, and we are scaling it up as fast as possible to keep up with climate change. And yeah, we're not alone with that. So how are we actually organized in these 2 programs? As I said, it's maintained by WMO and GWP, but we have a huge partner base. So for IDMP, we have over 45 partners actually now, and with APFM also over 35, I think. And these partners are from UN level, World Bank, and so on, but also academia and universities, and UNU Flores, of course, is a partner, and other national entities, also private sector entities. So we have this public-private partnership since over 10 years, where the private sector is also supporting us. And I will come to the mechanism through the help desk, how this actually works with our partners. And yeah, we have annual meetings with the partners, but also with the donors and other stakeholders. So we are organized in a very open way, and the kind of technical support unit, so we that are actually doing the coordination and the kind of secretariat work, we are based here in Geneva and at WMO headquarters. Yeah, and how do we actually work? So we are working kind of in 3 domains. The first one is the partnerships, and this also includes high-level policy, awareness raising. So we are working towards and attending and contributing to international processes like the climate conference or the climate convention, but also the Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD and UNFCCC. And we are a part of several other international frameworks, like the Sendai framework, to also increase disaster risk resilience, and yeah, other of these international frameworks. Then we are working on the knowledge side. So we are with partners coming up with new methods. We are improving existing methods. We are bringing together case studies, and we are managing that through capacity building and so on with many partners. And there, UNU Flores is, of course, a very helpful and important partner. And the third kind of area where we work, and for me, that's also, yeah, all of them are very important, but that's really where you can see a change. It's the implement and catalyze change. So we are doing projects. We are trying to support countries through our help desk, for example. I will come to that a little bit later. In implementing projects, improving early warning systems, or just establishing early warning systems that are embedded into a policy framework, as I mentioned before. And we look at very different aspects. From a gender perspective, we're currently working in East Africa to nature-based solutions, and yeah, trying to see also through our partners flood and drought in a very holistic or integrated way. And yeah, as I mentioned, we have these technical support units of WMO and GWP. We have a joint administration. We have joint communications kind of team. We are working closely with one of our partners, the Water Youth Network, where a couple of volunteers, very nice and great, help us in maintaining our social media channels and supporting us in many ways. And we're also currently in the middle of the process to join the help desks of the two programs, and I'll come to that later, because we see that there is such a lot of synergy between flood and drought management, but traditionally these are really completely different, also scientifically, of course, different communities. The one is more hydrological, meteorological driven, and the acronym of the drought side is often led from the agriculture side and the meteorological side. And yeah, the tendency is now really to think way more in this in a scale that includes both extremes, which are of course on the opposite ends, but which have a lot of in common when it comes to managing. And yeah, as I mentioned several times, I think already the help desks. So we maintain these two help desks, and you can find them on our websites, droughtmanagement.info and floodmanagement.info. And they're from students asking us what is the best indicator for drought in my country or under this and that condition, to governments that are requesting our support in establishing more drought resilience or a drought early warning or a drought vulnerability map. And if it's kind of these simple, fast questions, we have the knowledge or the capacity to answer, we do that directly. If we cannot do it directly, we have this partner base that I mentioned before. So we reach out to university partners or other partners and ask them to please support us in answering that requests. And this can, for example, also lead them into projects. So a couple of years ago, we had several requests from West African countries on flood and drought management. And then we kind of put this together and came up with a proposal for the Adaptation Fund, who is now funding their, I think, like around $10 million project to establish flood and drought early warning, flood and drought integrated management for the Volta basin in West Africa. For the drought program, IDMP, we also have regional programs. So you can see here on the map, West Africa, East Africa, Central and Eastern Europe, and the newest one is Caucasus and Central Asia in red, including Mongolia. And there we support the countries or the whole region beyond the project timescale. So we're just not implementing their one thing and then leaving again, but this is really where we use the network of GWP and the structure of WMO with the National Hydrological and Meteorological Services to support the countries in increasing their drought resilience on the long run. And of course, we can pilot ideas there as well. We work in many countries there in drought and gender or youth engagements, communities of practice, all kinds of different things that we then scale up in other projects around the world. Yeah, and as you can see in the small map, we are also working in many other places. So these are the current activities here you see on the map where we are implementing. And I mentioned drought monitoring and early alert. So this is what is usually understood. So you monitor on the one side with satellite data, but also on the ground hydrological data like precipitation measurements or stream flow, river measurements, or soil humidity. And yeah, this can be measured often in situ or from satellite, and then is put together into some kind of drought indicators. There are several ones, and they need to be really selected well for a specific country or region. Very known as, for example, the example here, the standardized precipitation index, SPI or SPEI with evapotranspiration. And yeah, this is then mapped and categorized. And then comes the key part. It needs to trigger some action, of course, because otherwise it's useless information, or not useless information, but rather scientific information. And so the key is really what I mentioned at the beginning, that there needs to be a plan, and this holds for floods as for droughts, where you say level 1, level 2, or whatever is translated into something where specific stakeholders need to do something. So this can be that if we see that there might be a drought coming up with water scarce situations, you lower the water pressure in the pipes, or farmers are not allowed to irrigate certain types of crops, but only crops that might be important to secure the food supply in the countries, things like that. So it's important that this is really embedded into this kind of national or regional drought plan. And in order to come up with this whole system, it's very important, of course, to engage all stakeholders. Often this is done on a policy level. The main stakeholders are the big farmers or the agricultural industry in developed countries, because they are the one with the best lobby. But actually the ones that are most and earliest hit by droughts are usually the most vulnerable, like migrants in developing countries, women that are often on the forefront because they are keeping the household together, working in the farms and so on, and being responsible for the water supply. And those are the ones that are usually not on the table when mechanisms like this are planned. And this is why they are not included into the solution. So we are really promoting this whole of society approach to make sure that that the most vulnerable are really in the focus of such plans, and not just big industrial energy complex and so on. Same holds, of course, then also for the flood part. So with APFM, with our flood program, we are promoting this end-to-end and people-centric flood early warning systems, with a lot of community-based approaches. So also for remote communities that don't have access or that are usually not informed by governments, we are trying to find solutions on the ground to really save lives and property, to help them in land use planning, and bring in all the knowledge that actually already exists. And also here with this program, we focus on the last mile awareness and the response capacities. And this is, of course, not, as I mentioned at the very beginning, not a third world problem, but it's actually a problem of many countries, including Germany, as we have seen in 2021. Yeah, this is just another example to provide a little insight how we work. So for drought, we have this 10 steps that we, through projects, implement in different countries. And this has been done in many countries, including USA, Brazil, Mexico, Morocco, where we accompany the countries in establishing a tailored drought policy and preparedness in their country or region. I won't go into the individual steps, but of course there's these consultations are very important in order to really make sure that everybody is on board. It's then important to include improving the mechanisms to monitor and improve the systems. And yeah, then perhaps to reflect again on what I mentioned, that we also work on this partnership level, that we try to increase the awareness of the international policy community on flood and drought risk. So we are also at the Conference of Parties at the COP15 of the Convention for Combating Desertification. Our program has been invited to support parties, so the countries, in improving their drought resilience or early warning systems. And that's, of course, something we take very serious, and where we offer to all countries or members an open hand, trying to identify funding sources with them, climate funding, whatsoever, and accompanying them in each step to improve their drought resilience. Some of you might have heard of the Early Warnings for All initiative. This was something that was launched last year by SG's Secretary General Guterres, that in 5 years there should be early warning systems for all over the world. And WMO is spearheading in this initiative. So Guterres tasked WMO to coordinate these efforts, and with APFM and IDMP, we're also part of this initiative. So what we are doing is also feeding into this early warnings for all initiative. And you can see here the 4 pillars of early warning. I mentioned that often the green pillar here, the preparedness and response capabilities, is often forgotten, and this is also what we've seen perhaps in Germany. Yeah, when we look where we stand currently, and these numbers are, we are sometimes a little bit difficult to interpret. So it means that 79 of the members of the countries that are a member at WMO have a forecasting for river and floods in place. For drought, the number looks even worse. So there is still a long way to go. And even if there is something, it's often just for a limited catchment within the country or the region. And so this is one of the initiatives, this early warning for all, where we work towards. And then just to say something about the larger plans, how to scale up for drought. At the beginning, I was mentioning that IDMP was established 10 years ago at the high-level meeting on national drought policy, another terrible acronym, HMNDP. So we're planning now another conference with many partners together called Drought Resilience Plus 10. So where we want to take stock, what has happened during the last 10 years, what worked out, what did not work out, what are the lessons learned, and then even more looking into 10 years into the future, or like we call it plus 10 years, but also just looking into the Sendai timescale or the SDG, the Sustained Development Goals timescale, and to see what we need to do in the next 10 years to really improve the situation, and that people on the ground are really less affected by the droughts. Of course, drought is a natural phenomenon, it will always happen, but we can reduce the vulnerability against droughts. And yeah, this is just the work streams that we are working currently to establish this conference, which will likely happen in Spain next February or April. Yeah, and this is just a very short overlook about where we are currently working, what is in the pipeline. So we are working, we have projects in many places around the world. We are doing a youth competition together with the Water Youth Network. All that are interested in that, I can highly recommend this. Then there are several knowledge products underway, but we are currently working with FAO and UNCCD and other partners or World Bank. We are supporting on the Balkans, some governments in drought work. We have community-based projects in several parts of the world. We're working on the social inclusion and drought that I mentioned, especially in Kenya and Sudan currently. Sudan, it's in the last weeks impossible to continue. And in the IGAD regions or in the Horn of Africa, we're also working on drought resilience. And then in the pipeline, we are, of course, constantly writing project proposals with partners. We are seeking bilateral funding through countries, through development banks like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank and others, to support the countries that seek support from us. And yeah, that's kind of where we are in the middle, and we see through climate change, what I mentioned at the beginning, that we really need to scale up and get faster and scale our operations up as well in order to support more countries. And that is already my last slide. I would like to invite you really to visit our websites, droughtmanagement.info or floodmanagement.info. And please also drop me a line via email or so. I'm happy to share that via the chat. If you're interested in getting more updates from us, we can include you in an email list, and then you will be invited to virtual exchanges that we are, for example, doing, where we have our partners present on the updates, or we have topical gatherings where we discuss different things. Yes. So with that, I would, I think, now stop sharing and give it back to you, Serena.
Thank you, Valentin, for such an enlightening and the broad overview. I think there is much to learn about droughts and floods. I think it's this multi-risk perspective. It's less and less, well, it's underestimated, I would say, by many governments. And as you said, it's not something that comes from developing country or transition countries, also in a well-developed world, that this is happening. I would like to leave the floor to questions, if there are any. In case then, if not, I would start with one first, because I'm quite interesting, and I would like to get a perspective from yours. Any questions from the floor? I would start with mine first, and I'm actually, it's more a reflection, and if you have a solution on how perhaps implementation can be adopted at the regional scale. I'm speaking for the Italian government. Normally, in our country, droughts, fire, floodings are demanded then to the regional responsibility. So there are overarching guidelines, and then it's downscaled to regional government. What happened is that often data is one of the major problems to derive scenarios. And on the other side, as far as I know, droughts, it's probably not at all included in this multi-risk early warning system. So what would be, this is rather something that they call new, that they never approached to, while with flooding, wildfire, they are rather way more implemented. When it comes to the emergency planning for municipality and early warnings, then we have basically no, even no technical asset to provide actually the way on how to implement this emergency planning. So how do you approach with other countries with this respect, and what can we learn from that? Over.
Yeah, I think that's certainly Italy is not alone with that. So what you've mentioned is that there's often this regional, or regional for us is usually multi-country. So regional, you mean like with this county level, so subnational level.
Subnational.
Often, yeah, there are often different responsibilities for different types of hazards, not just on this vertical scale, but also horizontally. You know that only agricultural the agricultural sector is responsible for the drought policy, and energy and domestic water or whatever is not really concerned. And so the approach that we are taking is, and this is really the most important step when we look into this 10 steps process for drought, for example, is to really bring the right actors together and generate within a government or within a governmental system this kind of agreement across the sectors and across the different levels that there needs to be something done. And usually we get the request from one ministry that is responsible, or it comes through WMO, through the Meteorological and Hydrological Service, that says, okay, we need an early warning system. And then we start the discussions. And yeah, sometimes we even face contradicting law setting. Like there is one example I mentioned where we recently were in Armenia, where we saw that there is an environmental, because they are facing droughts as well increasingly, where we saw that there was one law from the environmental ministry that said, of course, we need to protect our trees, also along the streams, because they are generating humidity and so on to make sure that we're more resilient against drought. On the other side, there was the water ministry that had a law that all trees should be cut within, it was like 10 meters or so from a stream in order to reduce evapotranspiration. So it was really contradicting. And so when we had this workshop, for the first time they talked to each other, and it was clear that, okay, something needs to be done. And I think this is our main recommendation at the beginning. There needs to be really a kind of agreement, and people need to come together from different sectors and discuss how to actively manage a drought. And it sounds way easier than it actually is, because all of these ministries, they have their traditional way of work, they have their traditional sector they are listening to, where they have stakeholders like farmers, also for a Ministry of Agriculture. And yeah, so to bring these aspects together and work together on a kind of drought policy and a framework and technical solutions, including early warning or even the seasonal forecasting, I think this is the most difficult part of this approach. And therefore we really say that an integrated approach is kind of really crucial, because otherwise you may look into it only from an energy perspective, or you may look into it only from a water perspective, or you just look into what you said, the regional level, and there is no overarching coordination on the national level. So all of these are I think, very important and make this so complex. I mean, not for a reason, we are still, even in very developed countries, at a level that we are every time again then shocked by low water levels or drought situations, because it's not a trivial thing to do. And it's nothing that we can say, okay, we do now this and that, like building a reservoir and then we are out of the situation for the next 10 years. It's really something where we continuously need to work and improve the situation.
Thank you. I have a question from the floor, which is rather broad and challenging. And it's so what, okay, it is a PhD student. And the question is related to how can we improve flood and drought mitigation strategies in Pakistan in the actual situation. This is very generic, but
yes,
I would say that it's including a lot.
I mean, Pakistan is actually a special case. So yeah, perhaps first of all, like it's formulated to mitigate flood and droughts. These are natural phenomena. So we can do a little bit to mitigate the situation by perhaps nature-based solutions like restoring forests, and in order to improve the permeability of the soil so that they can store more water and so on. But in general, we cannot really mitigate flood and drought because they will always occur. There will be floods and droughts in the future. What we can mitigate is the risk, means the vulnerability of the population against floods and droughts. And for Pakistan, I mean, you had this incredible brutal flood last year, which I think was unprecedented and cost hundreds of thousands of lives, and an incredible loss of property. And I know, for example, that the World Bank, and we supported that as well, has come up with a huge program to improve the flood resilience in the country. And so, and in this regard, a country that is facing climate change in a very direct and above average way is kind of similar to all the countries. You really need this integrated approach. There's a lot going on there, a lot of projects that I'm aware of for Pakistan, including flood and drought, and they all have, I think, an important role to contribute. And yeah, as a PhD student, as you are, I think it's really great that you look into that and think about, yeah, what could be a role that you would like to play in the future, perhaps also to increase the resilience in the country. And there are, I think, a lot of opportunities how this could be done, even in the private surrounding with family and so on, to make sure that they are aware how to respond to floods, that they perhaps are aware about how to improve the resilience against drought and so on. So it's, I think, not always only the big national steps that can help, but everybody can look into his own environment, how to get more resilient against floods and droughts.
Thank you. I have one more question from our Q&A. So what are the practical strategies or action used to engage government to implement the suggested risk management practices?
If I understand the question correct, is like how to raise the interest or the attention of government.
How would you implement then the strategies?
Yeah, to face the problem. I mean, this is a very important question, because it's really, if the government is not willing to do anything or is not aware about that they need to do something, we cannot come in and can't help, because this is of course a process that needs to be driven by the countries. I mean, there are grassroots movements and so on, but in order to on the larger scale to really improve the situation, we need the country to come in. And that's why we are working on this on the level of the UN conventions, with the UNFCCC, with the Climate Convention, but also with the Certification and Drought Convention, to raise this awareness. And like through WMO, we have these channels through the National Hydrological and Meteorological Services that can then, since they are aware of the situation, they can then go through their line management or whatever they integrated, usually in a ministry or so, and so they can start this political process. And the same through our GWP network. Yeah, and as I said, it's often really an issue that governments don't prioritize that because you're elected for 4 years or for 5 years in a democracy, and you think, okay, yeah, we were hit already last year by a flood, so perhaps it's safer if we invest in something else like schools and hospitals, which is of course very important. And we hope that we will not be hit by a flood or drought soon. And also what makes it less popular, I think, is for drought resilience, for example, if we are successful, if we can increase the resilience against droughts, this is not in the news. This is nothing, because nothing actually happens, hopefully. I mean, there will be a drought, there will be less water available, but and hopefully the people are still safe and can continue with their life, perhaps with a little bit restricted water use, but it shouldn't lead to a famine or something that is then actually in the news. So if we are successful, it's hard for a politician to justify that because he cannot earn the merits for that. On the other side, yeah, if he invests the public money into something else where he is sure that there are direct benefits visible for the communities, and he will be re-elected. So it's a little bit of a communication issue as well. When you, if you
Absolutely, achieving long-term goal with a short cycle of government is also an extremely difficult task to create continuity. So I have my colleagues here, Samanti, that would like to address your question. Let her doing it directly.
Thank you, Serena. Valentin, a bit of background. So or a bit of context, my background is in business and working with corporations. So I was wondering if you had any really good examples, for example, where you said, okay, it's a multi-stakeholder problem, but where there is a good collaboration with the private sector in these areas, because I'm thinking a lot of my research is also on sustainability reporting, and I wouldn't say that that's a strong topic. We're currently looking at the top management literature and just as water as a general topic was a search string and in our search string, and we found very little actually results in that. So I was wondering if you had from your practical experience any insights on this topic.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Samanti. I think that's it's coming more and more, and it's very important. And I think there is a huge gap and a huge potential there, including the responsibility and the solutions of the private sector more. And we see also more and more interest. So what we are doing in some of the GWP regions, for example, we are working with beverage companies, for example, that are of course heavily depending on healthy and sufficient water resources in the country. And yeah, they see their responsibility also more and more. Of course, they were also part of the problem, and this is nothing that can be neglected. But they have also, through their money and so on, a lot of potential to be part of the solutions. And yeah, this is something that we are looking into to increase the health, the watershed health, or work with them towards a plan on how to include them, for example, in drought plans, that they also have to reduce their production, things like that. Then we see that there is a big potential also in collaboration with data companies like Google or Facebook or so, where they are now approaching WMO as well, because they want their solutions also to be used. And so this is something where we both can learn from each other. So we can learn from the private sector how to better harvest data, how to analyze data better, and how to communicate also perhaps better to include more of the actual stakeholders of the issues. And I mean, I touched that, I think, with the beverage industry, but I think also something like the insurance companies or many other, the agricultural industry, obviously, are really depending on, as you said, either on water, or they are depending on like the reinsurance or insurance companies on flood and drought resilience. And I think they're realizing that more and more, and also taking up this responsibility more. Also companies like Bayer, which has not the best reputation, but they're also working on this. And this is not just greenwashing, because they really see that they have an issue because their resources are breaking. And so I think there is, in the coming years, there will be way more of this visible. We're already started to work on this with many companies, but yeah, there's still a lot to do.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for the insights.
Absolutely. Thank you, Samanti. And now it's my pleasure to give directly the floor to Professor Bebel here, that would like to address you directly a question.
Yeah, thank you, Serena, and thank you, Valentin. You can hear me, right? Great. So I'm a professor at Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand. And today I'm in Manila for a meeting with ADB tomorrow morning. Thank you for a very nice presentation. My question is, the floods and droughts in the past have been treated independently and separately. That's the first point which you have made it very clear, right? The point of this level of risk also was made very clear. Now, my question is that within a river basin or as country, let's take an example of river basin where some part of the basin is facing drought and some part of basin is facing flood, right? And this is spatially some part is drought prone or drought is being faced, other is flood, right? And also the temporally, which is very common, which happens almost everywhere, right? Now, what are the good examples you can tell us that these are the probable good solutions which would reduce the risk of both floods and droughts? Traditionally, we have been having reservoirs and dikes and all sort of things, right? But again, the frequency has gone up. As we said, it is because of climate change. We do not know how much is contributed to human activities and how much is internal climate change which is happening. Give us one or two good examples where we can say that because of this, the risk has been reduced, although the hazard has increased or the frequency and intensity has increased.
Thank you, Professor Bebel, and Valentin, floor is yours.
Yes, thanks, thanks a lot, Professor Bebel. I think very good question. And I think looking at Serena's country in Italy, we have just faced even not like a spatially separated flood and drought, but during this drought that northern Italy is currently facing, there was a huge storm and the people were flooded. So there was a flood situation within a drought situation. And this happens, of course, in many areas around the world. And so we are about to publish a publication about flood and drought, a joint management of flood and drought with FAO and UNCCD at the moment. And the World Bank, together with Deltares, has published, I think last year, the EPIC response framework, which is also a policy framework on how to improve the joint management of flood and drought. We contributed to that as well. So that's very interesting literature. I'm also happy to share that later. And we have, of course, also looked into case studies where we see that this flood and drought management together works and where we can see the synergies. And there is really a couple of things that can be done. First of all, very obviously, when you look into the different levels of drought management and flood management, it includes usually monitoring, early warning. So this can be, of course, put together, and it sounds obvious, but it's often not done. So you need information about rainfall, temperature, land cover, things like that feed into the forecasting of both extreme events. Then if you look into the risk landscape itself, you can collect the information for both of them. So if you look into risk, you have on the one side the hazard, and of course flood and drought is different, but climate projections include usually both extremes or the probability for both. Also, the information about vulnerability is a big overlap between flood and drought vulnerability, and the same for exposure, of course. So there we can see synergies. And then when it comes to the real risk mitigation, there's also a lot, and you already mentioned something like reservoirs. This is multi-purpose dams is still something that is very important, and of course, it needs to be balanced with ecological impacts and so on, but it's still a very good answer. So it's not gray infrastructure, is nothing per se bad or something not to be looked into anymore. Then every measure that increases the storage of water is actually something that can help against floods and against droughts. And this can be on a very small scale within a soil, for example. If you have a healthy soil with a permeable surface, then this can, of course, hold water, which can be used by plants during a drought, and it can also store the water so it does not directly discharge into a river where it can go into flooding. Or even on a larger scale, lakes, restoring wetlands, making sure that forests are still there. All this helps against flood risk and drought risk. Other solutions, if you look into the urban area, there is this famous Chinese
Valentin, let me break you here. Yeah, these are theoretically known to us. I want to know one or two good examples where the risk has been reduced with with these integrated approaches.
Yes. One example is, for example, China, what I just wanted to mention, sponge cities. They have actually really helped to store more water. So during drought periods, the water can be used. And during heavy precipitation events, the water is safe there. In Florida, in the Western US, there are very good examples of aquifers that are filled directly. There's a system how to fill aquifer during floods, during floods. So to increase the capture of groundwater that can be later used. In Morocco are similar projects. And actually all the examples where it was not called nature-based solutions before, but all the examples that you have, for example, in West Africa, so where you restore forests or where you save forests, you can prove that this has helped to keep humidity in the place, but also to reduce the flooding risk, or the flood hazard risk.
Thanks a lot, Valentin and Professor Weber. Sorry, we have to move. We have a couple of more questions, and I will be happy if we can reconnect as well with our colleagues later on, and I'll be more than happy. I have one more panelist actually that wanted to be had on the pile, and this is Daniel Karte, Professor Daniel Karte, and floor is yours.
Yes, and thank you very much, firstly, for your presentation. Greetings to Professor Babel, our project partner in the Global Water and Climate Adaptation Center. And my question is actually related exactly to this. When we look at flood and drought mitigation in the end, or adapting to such problems, there is, of course, always the local dimension that people in the affected localities need to deal with them. As you represent Global Water Partnership, what would you say is a best practice experience in global level international collaboration to help people better deal with floods and droughts?
Yeah, very, very good question. I mean, perhaps also a little bit to think about, because of course droughts and floods are something that happen on a country or even sub-country level, and that you need also to deal with on this level, because you cannot from the global level prescribe something to the local level. But from the Global Water Partnership perspective, of course, we work a lot with other international organizations around the world, where we then try to find this regional or national solutions. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is an answer that satisfies you, but of course also the international processes is something where we are trying to come together with other water organizations to increase this voice that something needs to change also on the country levels, where we try to engage governments or to approach governments and try to raise the awareness for the issue. And yeah, I think this is what comes to my mind.
Thank you. Daniel, does that?
Thank you very much.
Perfect. I have one last question now coming from one of our participants from the floor in written form. So are there empirical evidence in East Africa? Oh, wait a second. You have mentioned that disaster-stricken areas will be struck again in the future. Are there any empirical evidences on this? In East Africa, relocated people were reported to return back to their area that had been struck with flooding. So evidence-based approach for Eastern Africa.
Yeah, I think if I understand the question right, this is something that is a very well-known problem, that that people settle in places, in floodplains close to rivers where that they shouldn't settle. And I'll come to East Africa shortly. It's just an example from my PhD, for example. I've worked in the Niger River, West Africa, and there around in Niger, like in the country, we have seen that there was a very dry period during the 70s and 80s, and then people settled closer and closer to the river. Also, the memory of the people didn't go back to the times 50s or 60s when there was way more water, and they were not aware that there is actual flood risk. And so when it turned into more kind of normal conditions in the 90s, they were struck regularly again by floods. And this is something that we see more and more often. If you haven't had a flood for a couple of years, and then suddenly also in the Ahr Valley, for example, the people are then surprised, and they're settling in places where they actually shouldn't settle, because the last flood was in the Ahr Valley 1910 or 1804. I mean, we know that these could happen, but it's not really included in the land use planning. And for East Africa, it's of course the same. We see there is a flood happening. People are then moved out from the government, but after a couple of years, perhaps there is a different government. People don't think about this again. Other people might move in, or even the same people move in and say, okay, yeah, but better to live there because we don't have any other place to go. And actually in the floodplains, it's usually quite a fertile area. So this makes it easier for us. And new generation is perhaps taking over in the household, so this kind of familiar, or the family memory is not there anymore to remember that this is a place where actually nobody should settle. What can really help, and I think is needed in many places around the world, is a kind of regular risk assessment, and then really strict land use planning and so on that is based on that. I think in the EU there was now I think it's called Inform framework by the Joint Research Center, by JRC, established and I think implemented also in many countries, where every second year I think there is a reassessment of the risk for all areas, including vulnerability, exposure, and hazard. And this for different types of disaster, not just flood and drought, but also including flood and drought, but also many other disasters. And I think if this is consequently used, I think this could be a solution also for East Africa, of course.
Thank you, Valentin. I think that your topic have been, moving a lot of questions, and I'm really happy because nowadays climate extremes are really striking and creating more and more problems. So the more we are to try to fight against them, to try to find solution to better inform population and government, I think the better we are stronger on that. On that side, I would like to thank you for the great talk and the speech, and also for being so exhaustive in your answers. And I would like then to remain with all of you till in 1 month's time for our next seminar. And please keep in touch. And if you have any other question, Valentin has just kindly shared his email, and he will be happy to answer if you have any more, if you want to connect. Remember that IDMP is also a very important tool and instrument to also increase the drought management all over the world. So keep in touch with him, and to all of you, have a nice afternoon and enjoy your rest of the day, morning, wherever you are located. Bye for now, until next time. Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.